Quick question. How much does it cost to convince the Tsar of Russia to fund the biggest failure in military engineering history? One toy and the right last name. The Russian Empire is losing the war. The army's retreating, cities are falling one after another, and suddenly an engineer named Nikolai Nikolaevich Lebedenko walks up to Tsar Nicholas II and says, "Your Majesty, I have a solution. Wheels. Very big wheels." The Tsar looks at a wind-up toy driving over books on his desk and says, "Take millions." No consultations, no checks, no questions about physics. The result? A machine as tall as a 3-story building that drove 20 meters and got stuck forever. But here's the thing. Maybe Lebedenko never existed. Maybe it was someone way more powerful who just didn't want to associate his name with failure. Right now, I'm going to tell you about the most expensive tricycle in history and the mystery of the man who created it. To understand how a rational person could approve an insane project, you need to see just how hopeless the situation was. Because when you're losing a war and your empire is falling apart, you're ready to believe in anything, even a giant tricycle. 1915. Russia is completely screwed. And I'm not joking. This is the official military term, the Great Retreat. The Russian army has been retreating for months. Galicia lost. Warsaw lost. Riga's next. The Germans are advancing hundreds of kilometers. Millions of soldiers killed, wounded, or captured. And now the worst part. Nobody knows how to stop it. Trench warfare on the Western Front is hell, but at least the front line is stable there. Here, the front just flows east like spilled water. Every week, new lost cities. Every month, millions more refugees. In moments like these, rulers start looking for wonder weapons, something that will instantly turn the tide of war, something so powerful that the enemy will just surrender after seeing it. And it's exactly at this moment that a man named Nikolai Nikolaevich comes to the Tsar and offers something incredible. But there's a problem. Maybe that name was fake. There's one weird thing about Nikolai Lebedenko. Almost nobody knows who he actually was. And if you're thinking right now, so what? Maybe just an obscure engineer. You're missing the most interesting part. Because someone who got millions of rubles from the Tsar without any verification can't be just obscure. Here's what we know about Lebedenko. Practically nothing. No photographs, no biographical details, no previous projects. He appears in 1914 with an idea for a giant tank, gets funding, builds the machine, and disappears, like a ghost. Now, pay attention. Nicholas II wasn't a naive fool. He ruled the largest empire in the world. He'd seen thousands of projects. He had advisors, experts, military engineers. And suddenly some unknown dude with the last name Lebedenko shows up, demonstrates a toy, and the Tsar instantly gives him millions without consulting specialists, without checking qualifications, without any questions. This isn't normal. This isn't how it works at all. So who was Lebedenko really? There's one theory that explains everything, and if it's true, this whole story becomes even more absurd. Sometimes the simplest explanation is to look at a person's name, because if you pay attention to Lebedenko's full name, you'll see a detail that changes the entire story. Nikolai Nikolaevich Lebedenko. Stop for a second. Nikolai Nikolaevich. Now remember, what was the name of the supreme commander of the Russian army in 1914-1915? Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich Romanov, the Tsar's own uncle. Coincidence? Maybe. Or there's a theory that Lebedenko is just a pseudonym, that the project was actually invented by the Grand Duke himself, possibly after reading French fiction about giant battle machines. Think about it. Who else could come to the Tsar and get millions without verification? Who else could say, "Give me money for a crazy idea," and the Tsar would reply, "Yes, uncle." This explains everything. Why there are no photos of Lebedenko, why there's no biography, why the Tsar agreed so easily. Because if you're a Grand Duke and Supreme Commander and your idea fails, it's better if everyone thinks it was done by some random engineer, Lebedenko, not you. And if it works, you can always say, "I invented it." Smart, right? Only there's one problem. You should have checked the physics first. When you see the blueprints of the Tsar Tank for the first time, your brain can't process the scale of absurdity. Because this isn't just a big tank. This is an engineering idea that ignores basic physics so boldly you gotta respect it. 2 front wheels, each one 9 meters in diameter. 9 meters! That's taller than a giraffe. That's taller than a double-decker bus. If these wheels were in the city center, people would think it's an art installation. Between the wheels, an armored box. Mass, 40 tons. Crew, 15 men. Armament, cannons and machine guns. Engines, 2 Maybachs at 120 horsepower each. That's space-age technology for 1915. And now, drumroll, the rear wheel, 1.5 meters, like a bicycle. Imagine a bus driving on 2 giant wheels in front and 1 tiny wheel from a kid's bike in the back. Would you get on that bus? No? Well, the Russian army said, "Let's try it." And you know what's funniest? The math showed it should work. Calculations by engineer Zhukovsky, a real aviation genius, by the way, said, yes, the engines will turn the wheels. Yes, the machine will move. The only thing they forgot to calculate, ground pressure. And now, the best part, they made a toy model, and it worked perfectly. So let's see how they sold this idea to the Tsar. There's an art to convincing people to fund crazy ideas. And someone, Lebedenko or the Grand Duke, mastered it perfectly. Because it's one thing to have a crazy idea. It's another to convince an emperor to give you a whole army's budget. They didn't bring blueprints, didn't show calculations. They brought a toy, a working model with a wind-up clockwork mechanism the size of a shoebox. The scene? The Tsar's office, the emperor, generals, advisors. On the table, stacks of books. "Your Majesty, these are trenches." They wind up the toy. The little wheels spin. The tiny tank drives straight toward Tolstoy's War and Peace, rolls over it easily, elegantly. The Tsar is delighted. Brilliant! And this is where something important should happen. Someone should ask, what about weight? What about ground? What if it rains? Nobody asked. Because the toy worked on the table, and if it works on the table, it'll work on the battlefield. That logic, ironclad. And I know what you're thinking right now. Were they really that stupid? No, they were desperate, and desperate people believe in miracles. The Tsar signed the funding. Millions of rubles went into construction, and the machine started growing, literally. When you start building something absurd, the first signs of trouble appear immediately. And if you ignore them, you just make the final catastrophe more epic and more expensive. Summer 1915, secret location near Moscow. The word secret here is funny because when you're building wheels as tall as a building, the whole neighborhood sees it. Each front wheel, 9 tons of steel and wood. Workers look at the blueprints. "Boss, are these definitely the right numbers?" "Yes, Petya, 9 meters." Good Lord! The weight grows, 20 tons, 30, 40. Somewhere around this point, engineer Zhukovsky probably woke up at night in cold sweat thinking, damn, the rear wheel. But it was too late. Money spent, construction nearly done, the Tsar is waiting, the army is losing, gotta show results. And so, August 1915, test day, moment of truth. The machine is ready, everyone's waiting to see the future of warfare. Spoiler, they saw the future of failure. There's a special kind of disappointment when something works just long enough to give you hope and then breaks forever. And the worst part isn't the failure itself. The worst part is realizing that failure was inevitable from second one, but everyone ignored it. August 1915, testing ground. Officers, engineers, maybe even members of the royal family. Everyone staring at the metal giant. Engine startup, a roar like 10 airplanes. Birds take off in panic. The ground shakes. The wheels start turning. The machine moves. It's actually moving. First meter, second, fifth. The front wheels roll over bumps like it's asphalt. The Tsar Tank meets a young birch tree arm thick and snaps it like a matchstick. Applause, hugs, we did it, we're going to win. 10 meters, 15, 20, and then the rear wheel starts sinking into the ground. At first barely noticeable, the machine slows a bit, the engines compensate, roar louder. The wheel sinks deeper, even deeper. The front wheels spin, engines scream at maximum, 40 tons of metal trembling from the strain. But the machine doesn't move. The rear wheel has completely sunk into the ground, like an anchor, like a monument to human overconfidence. And you know what Zhukovsky thought at that moment? Probably something like, well, now I'll be remembered not as the father of Russian aviation, but as the dude with the tricycle. And now the scariest part, the math that explains why this happened and why any freshman engineering student could have told them this. There's a formula from freshman year engineering that everyone knows, and if you ignore it, you can build something magnificent that can't drive the length of a school bus. Pressure equals weight divided by contact area. Giant front wheels, huge contact area, pressure distributed so you don't sink. Small rear wheel, all weight on a tiny point, pressure concentrated, sinks like a stone in a swamp. It's like the difference between lying on a board with 1,000 nails, tolerable, and standing barefoot on one nail, catastrophic. Any peasant who'd gotten stuck in mud with a cart knew this intuitively. Any student could have calculated it in 5 minutes. But Engineer Lebedenko, or Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich, if the theory is true, didn't check. And now they had a problem. What to do with a 40-ton failure in the middle of the forest? There are things worse than failure. One of them is ignoring failure and hoping it'll disappear on its own. Because every day you don't acknowledge the mistake makes it more awkward, more expensive, and more unforgettable. After the test failure, military officials did the most obvious thing. They left. The Tsar Tank stayed there, in the forest, near Moscow. 40 tons of steel, engines worth a palace, cannons, armor, all of it just stood there rusting. Nobody tried to fix the design, even though the solution was obvious, bigger rear wheel. Nobody even took the valuable parts. 1 year, 2, 5. The 1917 Revolution, Civil War, the Empire fell, the Tsar was executed, Grand Duke Nikolai also executed, and the Tsar Tank still stood there. Peasants walked past it, children played inside, birds built nests. The biggest tank in history became a playground. And if the theory about the Grand Duke is true, he died without ever admitting it was his idea. Maybe that's for the best. For 8 years, it stood there, until someone decided to end this once and for all. Even metal giants die. The question is, how humiliating will the death be? And for a machine that was supposed to change warfare, the end was as inglorious as its only journey. 1923. The Bolsheviks, now ruling what was left of Russia, decided to scrap the Tsar Tank. Not because the metal was urgently needed, but because even for people who melted church bells for bullets, this machine was too absurd. The wheels were cut up, metal melted down, engines dismantled. Nothing remained of the biggest tank. No museums, no memorials, just photos and documents. And the legend of the mysterious engineer Lebedenko, who maybe never existed. But the story doesn't end here, because humanity learned nothing. People don't learn from others' mistakes. They repeat them with new technologies and bigger budgets. And if you think gigantism died with the Tsar Tank, oh, how wrong you are. Germans in WW2, the Mouse Tank, 188 tons of metal that couldn't cross bridges. French, the 2C, bus length, pedestrian speed. USSR, nuclear tanks, giant echinoplans. All of them failures. Every time the logic is the same. If we make it big enough, it'll be invincible. Every time the result is the same, an expensive thing that doesn't work. Because physics doesn't care about ambitions, math isn't impressed by budgets, reality doesn't read PowerPoint presentations. The Tsar Tank drove 20 meters, but its real journey is longer, from triumphant approval through months of construction to failure, through 8 years of abandonment to complete destruction. And the scariest part, at every stage, someone could have stopped and asked simple questions, checked the math, said, no. Nobody did. Maybe because Lebedenko was actually the Grand Duke whom you can't refuse. Maybe because everyone was afraid to admit the absurdity. But the result is one, the most expensive monument to human overconfidence rusting in the forest for 8 years. The story of the Tsar Tank is a story about how ambition, desperation, and lack of basic verification create catastrophe. And also, possibly, about how powerful people hide behind fake names when they don't want to be associated with failure. If you enjoyed this story about an epic fail, click on the next video. There are even more insane military projects that seemed like good ideas. And if you love absurd weapons, a like will help others enjoy this too. See you in the next video, where hopefully something will drive more than 20 meters.